The old fruit vendor didn't look at her face anymore. He just watched her hands as she sorted through the wooden crates behind his shop every Wednesday morning, carefully selecting the apples with the softest brown spots, the ones too damaged to sell. She never took from the good pile. She never asked for permission. She had learned long ago that survival was built on small acts of invisibility. What she didn't know was that someone had been watching her, not with pity, but with purpose. Someone who had learned that the greatest transformations often begin with the smallest, most unexpected kindness. This is the story of how one whispered invitation changed everything. The morning air smelled like rotting fruit and old cardboard when Maria checked the crates behind Marino's fruit shop. Her fingers were already stained yellow and brown from days of sorting, searching, selecting. The October cold bit at her exposed wrists where the sleeves of her oversized sweater had worn thin, but she barely noticed anymore. Pain and discomfort had become the constant background noise of her life, so familiar that the absence of it would have felt strange. She was 34 years old, though her face might have convinced someone she was closer to 50. Life had a way of aging people faster when it was lived on the edges of society, when meals were uncertain and shelter came with conditions and shame. Maria had learned to read desperation in other people's eyes because she saw it in the mirror every single day. The story of how she arrived at this exact moment, sorting through waste fruit on a cold Wednesday morning, didn't happen suddenly. It had unfolded slowly, the way catastrophes usually do, not with a single, dramatic collapse, but with 1,000 small surrenders. Each one seemed manageable at the time. Each one felt temporary. Each one turned out to be permanent. 7 years ago, Maria had a different life. She had worked as a receptionist in a dental office, a quiet job that suited her quiet nature. She had a small apartment on the 3rd floor of a building that had good light in the afternoons. She had a cat named Bella who would sleep on her lap while she read books on Sunday mornings. These details might seem small to someone with stability, but, to Maria now, they felt like memories from another person entirely. The first crack appeared when the dental office closed. The owner, Dr. Patterson, had given everyone a month's notice. He was retiring, moving to Florida with his wife, and the building was being sold to a developer. Maria remembered the way her stomach had twisted during that conversation. She remembered thinking she would find another job quickly. People always needed receptionists, didn't they? The market was good. The economy was fine. She had decent skills. She was wrong on every count. The recession that followed hit harder than anyone expected. Dental offices weren't hiring. Nobody was hiring much of anything. Maria's savings lasted 3 months. She paid her rent for 4 months with her credit card, thinking the situation would improve, thinking temporary measures could bridge temporary problems. But the problems weren't temporary. The waiting period between jobs stretched from weeks into months. The credit card filled up. The debt began to breed more debt. She moved to a cheaper apartment. Then, cheaper still. Each move meant paying deposits and fees, which meant going deeper into debt. The landlords in cheaper buildings didn't ask as many questions, but they required cash for everything. They didn't care about eviction laws. They didn't care about warning periods. When she couldn't make rent for 2 months, they simply changed the locks while she was at the grocery store. She was 30 years old when she became homeless. The word itself seemed impossible when she first thought it. Homeless was something that happened to other people, people with different circumstances, different struggles. But definitions don't care about what you think about yourself. Homeless was what you were when you owned 2 suitcases and a sleeping bag and no legal place to be. The first shelter she went to was clean and well organized. There were rules about hours and conduct. There were social workers who offered help and counseling. Maria felt hopeful there for almost 3 weeks. She thought this was the bottom, and that the only direction from here was up. She thought being down on her luck was temporary. She was still thinking that the night the other woman woke her at 3 in the morning, screaming from nightmares, thrashing around and accidentally hitting Maria in the face with her fist. Maria's nose broke. The shelter offered her an ice pack. They couldn't remove the other woman because she had been there longer. Seniority, they explained, was part of the system. She left before her nose had even stopped swelling. The streets of the city were bigger than they looked during the day. At night, with nothing but a backpack of clothes and no destination, they felt endless. Maria learned quickly that the safest places were the ones where other homeless people had already made camp. There was safety in numbers, or at least there was consistency. She found a group of regulars near the park, under the highway overpass where the trains rattled past every 15 minutes, but the cold didn't penetrate quite as deeply. There was an older man there named Hector who had been homeless for 12 years. He showed her which shelters actually held their security deposits in an account instead of pocketing them. He showed her which churches gave out meal tickets on which days. He showed her which parking garage bathrooms didn't have surveillance cameras. These were the kind of skills you couldn't find in any manual. They were passed down like ancient knowledge. Maria spent 2 years learning to be invisible. She learned that the worst part of homelessness wasn't hunger or cold. It was the way people looked through you. A homeless person standing on a street corner was less visible than a stray dog. Dogs at least provoked some reaction, sometimes affection, sometimes fear, but something. Homeless people provoked nothing. They were urban background noise, the parts of the city people trained themselves not to notice. She got jobs during those years. Temporary work at a call center that asked no questions and paid in cash every Friday. Day labor at a distribution warehouse where she loaded boxes for 8 hours. But every job came with the same problem: she needed an address to get paid by direct deposit. The cash jobs barely covered the cost of sleeping in motels, which cost $15 to $20 a night and were sometimes worse than sleeping outside. The tent city grew and shrank with the seasons. When winter came, people became desperate and violent. When spring arrived, some people would disappear, probably finding somewhere else to be, maybe finding their way back to normal life. New people would arrive, each with their own catastrophic story. Maria listened to some of them. After a while, she realized that the specific details didn't matter much. The ending was always the same: they were here, at the bottom, and the distance back to normal seemed impossible to measure. By her second year living on the streets, Maria had stopped making plans. Planning required hope, and hope had become a luxury she couldn't afford. She woke up each morning, found water, looked for food, found a place to sleep, and repeated. The days blended together. Marino's fruit shop had been her salvation, though she wouldn't have called it that at the time. She had simply learned that he threw away his damaged fruit on Wednesday mornings instead of Sunday afternoons like most vendors. The apples that were soft, the oranges with spots, the bananas with brown bruises, these were technically spoiled, but only barely. Fruit didn't become poison just because it looked imperfect. It just became invisible to people with choices. She had been sorting through those crates for 3 years now. 3 years of Wednesday mornings, of careful selection, of never taking more than she could eat or trade. Marino had never spoken to her. He never acknowledged her presence directly. But he also never called the police. He simply came out around 9 o'clock, stepped over her without comment, and went about his business. This arrangement suited Maria. There was a rhythm to it. There was consistency. There was something almost respectful about being ignored by someone who had every right to chase her away. On this particular Wednesday morning, as Maria selected a soft but still good apple with beautiful red undertones, she didn't notice anything different. The cold was the same. The fruit was the same. Her fingers were as stained as always. What she didn't know was that the man who stepped out of Marino's shop wasn't Marino. He was Marino's nephew, visiting from out of state, and, unlike his uncle, he had been watching Maria with actual attention. His name was David, and he was 41 years old. He worked in construction and restoration, the kind of work that required you to notice things: structural problems, hidden damage, the places where things were breaking down. He had developed a skill for seeing what was wrong and what could be fixed. He had arrived at his uncle's shop only 20 minutes earlier, early for a family meeting, and immediately spotted Maria moving methodically through the fruit crates. He watched her for several minutes, the careful way she selected items, the politeness of her taking only what was clearly waste, the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. Something in the way she moved made him stop and really look at her. He saw a woman who was still dignified despite everything about her appearance that suggested she had stopped caring. She wore layers of worn clothing, but they were clean. Her hair was tied back neatly, even though it was gray and thin. Her hands moved with purpose, not desperation. She was doing this with calculation, not panic. David had a sister who had struggled with addiction and homelessness. He had watched her decline for years before she finally died in a shelter in Sacramento. He had learned too late that his judgment and his shame had been barriers between them. He had learned that most people on the streets weren't there because they were bad, they were there because the system had failed them, or because one bad luck followed another bad luck until they couldn't catch themselves anymore. He watched Maria finish her selection and carefully place the apples into a canvas bag that had been mended several times. He watched her stand up, prepared to leave, trying to make herself small and unobtrusive one more time. Something in his chest shifted. He understood, in a sudden and clear way, that walking away was the easier choice. His uncle would be fine with it. He would probably prefer it. But understanding that didn't make it the right choice. He stepped out of the shop. Maria froze. She had learned that any unpredicted interaction could be dangerous. The man was looking at her, actually looking at her, not through her. "Do you live nearby?" he asked. His voice was calm, ordinary, not threatening. Maria didn't answer immediately. She had learned to be careful with questions. In her experience, questions usually contained judgment. "I'm asking because I have work," he continued, when it became clear she wasn't going to answer. "Physical work. A house restoration just outside the city. I need help, and I pay fairly. Interested?" Maria stared at him. This was obviously a trap of some kind. Men who approached homeless women didn't offer legitimate work. That wasn't how the world worked. "Why?" she asked finally. David smiled a little. "Because I need help and you clearly need work. That's usually how those things align." "I don't have references," Maria said. It was true, and also not the real issue. "I don't care about references," David said. "I care about whether you can follow instructions and whether you'll show up." "I don't have an address," Maria said, still listing obstacles like reciting a prayer. David pulled out a small notepad and wrote something down. He tore out the page and handed it to her. "This is my number. Call me tomorrow morning before 8. We start at dawn on Friday. The work is 4 hours from here. I'll pick you up." He paused, then added, "Bring a thermos. I'll have coffee and breakfast waiting. The work is sorting and organizing, not glamorous, but honest." He turned and walked back into the shop. Maria stood there, holding the piece of paper, holding the fruit. Her hands were shaking, though not from cold. She had forgotten what it felt like to be offered something without invisible strings attached. She had forgotten that such interactions existed. She read the phone number 3 times to memorize it. She couldn't afford to lose this paper. Then, carefully, reverently, she placed it in the inside pocket of her jacket, where she kept the other few precious things she owned. That night, she didn't sleep. She lay in the tent that another homeless woman named Sarah had helped her set up, and she thought about the conversation. She thought about all the ways it could be a mistake. She thought about the fact that showing up meant exposing herself to someone who could reject her, someone who could hurt her, someone who could prove that her distrust of the world was justified. But she also thought about something else. She thought about the way his eyes had looked at her, not with pity, not with the uncomfortable guilt that people sometimes showed when they confronted proof that their society wasn't working. Just with straightforward recognition that she was a person in a situation, and that he could improve that situation. It was the most honest interaction she had experienced in years. She made the call at 7:43 a.m. on Thursday morning, using a payphone outside a gas station. Her hands were shaking so badly that she could barely dial the numbers. David answered on the second ring. "Hi Maria," he said, as if they had known each other for years. "I'm glad you called. Be ready at 5:30 a.m. tomorrow." She had forgotten that she had told him her name. She wondered if that was important, if remembering someone's name meant something. She wondered if she was being foolish. But, when 5:30 a.m. came on Friday morning, she was standing on the corner he had specified, wearing all the clean clothes she owned, holding her thermos and her fear and her fragile, almost painful hope. A red pickup truck pulled up. David lowered the window. He was wearing work clothes and an honest expression. "Get in," he said. "We've got a long drive." Maria climbed into the truck, and something fundamental shifted in the universe, though neither of them would have noticed it at the moment. The truck pulled into traffic, heading toward the highway and the restoration project that would become the bridge between her old life and her new one. What neither of them knew yet was how much work that bridge would require, how many doubts would arise, how many moments of fear and disbelief would follow. But, for now, in the cab of a truck with hot coffee waiting in a thermos and a destination that wasn't survival, wasn't desperation, but something else entirely, the beginning of something more. Maria watched the city fall away behind her and tried not to cry. The house they were driving to had been built in 1952, a beautiful mid-century property that had belonged to the same family for 60 years. When the elderly owner finally passed away, her children discovered that she had barely maintained it. The roof had leaks. The foundation showed cracks. The interior was suffocating under decades of accumulated items and memories. It was the kind of project that required patience and skill and an eye for what could be saved. David had been doing restoration work for nearly 20 years. He understood old houses the way other people understood people. He knew their vulnerabilities, their strengths, the places where they needed support. Maria would learn all of this gradually, but, on the first morning, she only knew that she was sitting in a cab of a truck at 5:40 a.m., driving along a highway, and the world felt slightly different. Not good exactly, but different. "The work today is going to be basic," David said, keeping his eyes on the road. "We need to clear out the interior, sort through things, figure out what can be salvaged. It's not complicated work, but it's hard on the back. Let me know if you need to stop." Maria nodded. She was used to hard work. She was used to ignoring her body's complaints. "I should tell you," David continued, "I'm hiring you as a contract worker. That means you're going to need a way to get paid. Do you have a bank account?" The question was complicated. Maria had opened a bank account once, years ago, but she had closed it when she became homeless because they charged monthly fees for accounts with low balances. She had thought about opening another one, but the process felt impossibly complex. "Not right now," she said carefully. "Okay," David said, without judgment or surprise. "We can handle that today. There's a bank not far from the job site. We'll get you set up with a basic account. Then, I can deposit your pay electronically. Sound good?" Maria didn't know what to say. She had been so far removed from normal systems for so long that the idea of moving back into them felt like a foreign language. "You're going to want to know about housing," David continued. "The work is going to take about 3 weeks. I know someone who rents out a small studio apartment month to month. It's not fancy, but it's yours if you want it. The rent is $200 a month, and I'm going to pay you $30 an hour, which for the hours you'll work comes to about $1,800 a month. So you'll have money left over." He said it matter-of-factly, like he was reading items off a grocery list. Maria listened to these numbers, trying to process them. $1,800. She tried to remember what it felt like to have that much money. It was a fantasy. It was impossible. "Why are you doing this?" she asked finally. She had been wondering this the entire drive, and she couldn't hold the question in anymore. David was quiet for a long moment. He kept his eyes on the highway, his hands steady on the wheel. "I had a sister," he said slowly. "Her name was Elena. She was 10 years younger than me. Smart, funny, had dreams about being a social worker, actually. But she started using drugs in college. Just experimenting," she said. "Just for fun. Just for a while." He paused at a traffic light. "I was angry at her," he continued. I told myself I was disappointed, but mostly I was angry. Angry that she was wasting her potential. Angry that she was making bad choices. Angry that she wasn't listening to me when I told her to stop. I told her I was done with her. I told her to get clean or get out of my life. The light turned green. She got out of my life, David said. She went down to Sacramento. I heard through other family members that she was living rough. I heard she was dealing with more than drugs at that point. I heard a lot of things. I didn't do anything about any of them, because I was still angry. I was still keeping score. He turned onto a smaller road, heading toward the suburbs. She died in a shelter 7 years ago, he said. Pneumonia, and a general system that had stopped caring about her. By the time I found out, it was too late to tell her I was sorry. By the time I figured out that the anger wasn't about her disappointment, it was about my own failure to love her through her pain, she was gone. David's voice didn't shake. But his hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. I see her every time I look at someone sleeping on the street, he continued. I see her every time I pass someone sorting through garbage. I see her, and I think about all the small kindnesses that might have made a difference, and I didn't give them. He pulled the truck onto a quieter road. So when I saw you at my uncle's shop, he said, and I saw someone clearly intelligent and capable, someone doing what needed to be done to survive with dignity, I thought about Elena. And I thought, I can't help Elena anymore. But I can help her. And that's what I'm doing. Not for you, really. Not entirely. But for the chance to be the person I should have been for my sister. They drove in silence for a while. Maria didn't cry, though something inside her shifted and loosened. I don't know how to do this, she said finally. How to be normal again. How to have an apartment and a bank account and a job. I don't remember what any of it feels like. That's okay, David said. You'll learn it the same way you learned how to be homeless. One day at a time. One thing at a time. The systems don't care if you're rusty. They're designed to accommodate people. You're going to be fine. Maria wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust that it could be this simple, that someone could just offer a hand, and you could pull yourself back to solid ground. But years of disappointment had trained her to expect collapse. She waited for the moment when David would reveal his true intentions, when this would turn out to be some version of the predatory encounters she had experienced before. The moment never came. The house was beautiful when they arrived. Built with pale brick and large windows, it seemed to glow in the early morning light. The driveway was cracked, and the lawn hadn't been properly maintained, but the structure itself had a kind of dignity, even in disrepair. We're going to bring this back to life, David said, pointing at the house. That's what my work is, bringing broken things back to life and making them beautiful again. Your job today is to help me clear out the rooms so we can see what we're working with underneath. Inside, the house was chaotic. Every room was packed with the accumulated possessions of 60 years, furniture that wouldn't sell, boxes of old photographs, kitchen equipment from the 1970s, clothes, books, papers. It was the kind of overwhelming mess that required not just physical work but emotional fortitude. Every item represented someone's choices, someone's memories. But there was beauty too. Maria could see it as they worked, the original hardwood floors underneath years of dingy carpet. The crown molding that had been painted over in beige but was likely original plaster. The wide windows that let in incredible light once they cleared the boxes away from them. David worked beside her. He didn't stand back supervising. He didn't make her feel inferior or grateful. He simply worked, moving boxes, sorting items, explaining what could be saved and what needed to go. By noon, they took a break. David had packed sandwiches and fruit. They sat on the front steps of the house, and Maria realized it was the first time she had eaten a meal in daylight in years, sitting with another person, not hiding. What made you think you could approach me? She asked. Most people are terrified of homeless people. Are you a threat? David asked. No, Maria said. But they don't know that. I'm not most people, David said. I've learned through expensive lessons that assumptions about people usually say more about me than they do about them. The work continued for the next 3 weeks. Every day, David picked her up at 5:30 a.m. Every day, they worked clearing and sorting and beginning the restoration. Every day, Maria's body ached less. Every day, the world seemed slightly more like a place she might belong. David helped her open the bank account at a small credit union near the job site. The process was surprisingly easy. She had her ID, and that was enough. She watched as David helped her fill out the form, watched as her name went into the system as someone legitimate, someone who existed in the official world again. She moved into the studio apartment on the first Friday. It had one room, a kitchen that was barely more than a kitchenette, and a bathroom. The walls were clean. The bed had clean sheets. The apartment had a lock that only she controlled. Maria sat on that bed and cried for 3 hours. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of being safe, of being sheltered by her own choices and her own money, not by charity or luck or the goodwill of strangers. She went to the bank on Saturday and withdrew $200 to pay her rent. The landlord looked surprised. Most of his tenants were other people escaping something. He asked no questions and took the cash without comment. The next week, Maria started imagining what came next. She couldn't keep working for David forever. Eventually, the house would be restored. Eventually, the project would end. She had to think about sustainability, about building something that didn't depend on him. She asked him about it while they were working on the second floor, clearing the bedrooms. I've been thinking about what I want to do, she said. When the project ends. Okay, David said, not pressing. I want to go back to school, she said. I want to be able to do something real. Something permanent. David set down the box he was carrying. That's smart, he said. What would you study? I don't know yet, Maria said. But I know I don't want to just go back to being a receptionist. I want something that matters. Something where I'm helping people. You're already doing that, David said. You're helping your future self by investing in your future self. That matters. That night, Maria went to the library and looked at community college programs. She found one for social work. She discovered it was a 2-year program and that there were financial aid options and scholarship opportunities. She discovered that the process of becoming someone new didn't have to happen all at once, it could happen gradually, class by class, skill by skill. When David picked her up the next morning, she had a plan. It felt fragile, but it felt like a plan. I'm going to enroll, she told him. In community college. In the fall. That's great, David said. I'll help you with the application if you want. Why do you keep helping me? She asked. It was the same question, asked a different way. David was quiet. Then, he said, because you're worth helping. And because sometimes the world works better when we do what we can, for the people we meet. My sister taught me that lesson through her absence. I'm trying to honor her by being the person for someone else that I couldn't be for her. He paused. But also, he added, because I like you. I like your quiet competence. I like the way you work without complaining. I like the way you're starting to believe that good things might happen to you. I like knowing that you're going to build a life. That's enough reason all by itself. Maria started community college that September. She worked part-time at a retail store and part-time helping David with smaller projects. She lived in the studio apartment. She started eating regular meals. She started sleeping through the night without waking in panic. The restoration of the house took 5 weeks instead of 3. The family who owned it was so pleased with David's work that they asked him to handle everything, not just the structural restoration but the full renovation. David took the project on, and he kept Maria on his team. By the time the project finished, Maria had completed her first semester of college. She had maintained a 3.8 GPA. She had stopped thinking about survival and started thinking about the future. On the day the house was completed, the family threw a small celebration. They hired a caterer. They invited David and his workers. Maria wore a new dress that she had bought with her own money, and she stood in the beautiful house that she had helped restore, and she thought about the path that had brought her here. A woman from the family approached her. "David told us what he did for you," she said. "How he picked you from the street and gave you a chance." Maria felt something twist in her chest. She understood suddenly that other people would tell this story as a narrative of salvation, as David rescuing her from homelessness. But it wasn't quite that simple. David had offered opportunity, but Maria had been the one to take it. David had paid for her labor, but Maria was the one who had worked. David had suggested community college, but Maria was the one doing the work, the studying, the building. "He recognized that I was capable," Maria said carefully. "And he gave me a chance to prove it." "That's not quite the same as rescue." The woman smiled. "That's a more accurate way to put it." "I think you're right." Later that night, after everyone had left, Maria and David stood in the empty house. The walls had been repaired and painted. The floors had been refinished. The windows shone. It looked exactly as it must have looked when it was first built, before time and neglect had marked it. "What's next for you?" David asked. "Next semester," Maria said. "More classes. More work. I want to volunteer at a homeless shelter while I'm studying. I want to understand the system better so I can work in it effectively." "That sounds like you," David said. "You're going to be a good social worker. You've lived the experience. That matters." "What about you?" Maria asked. "What's next for you?" David looked around the house, at all the work he had done, at the way he had brought it back to life. "I'm thinking about starting a non-profit," he said. "A job training program for homeless people. Teaching them restoration and construction skills. The way you learned from me, teaching others. Making it sustainable, making it systematic." Maria understood suddenly that David hadn't just helped her. She had helped him too. She had been the catalyst that had prompted him to think bigger, to do more, to transform his personal grief about his sister into something that could help many people. "I want to help with that," she said. David smiled. "I was hoping you would." 5 years later, Maria was 29 credits away from her degree in social work. She was the program coordinator for a nonprofit called Elena's Path, which trained homeless and formerly homeless people in construction and restoration skills. She lived in a one-bedroom apartment that she shared with a cat she had adopted from a shelter. She had health insurance and a 401k and friends and a life that was so far removed from the life of sorting through rotten apples that it felt like a dream. But she still remembered Wednesday mornings at Marino's fruit shop. She still remembered the cold and the hunger and the way it felt to be invisible. She remembered because remembering made her better at her job. It made her more compassionate with the people who came to Elena's Path, scared and uncertain and wondering if change was really possible. She worked with David daily. They had become something more than colleagues, they had become partners in a mission. They didn't speak about it much, but they both understood that they had saved each other. Elena's ghost had introduced them. David's grief had prompted his kindness. Maria's acceptance of that kindness had shown him the path toward transforming it into something systematic, something that could help hundreds of people. One day, while they were training a new cohort of workers, one of the students, a woman who had been homeless for 6 years, asked Maria how she did it. How she had made the jump from surviving to thriving. Maria thought about the question carefully. She thought about Marino, who had quietly allowed her to sort through his waste. She thought about Hector, who had taught her the skills to survive. She thought about the social workers at the first shelter, who had tried their best within a broken system. She thought about David, who had taken the risk of approaching a stranger and seeing her potential. "It wasn't one thing," she told the student. "It was a lot of small kindnesses, and one person who was willing to take a chance on me. But the most important part was that I was willing to take a chance on myself. I had to believe that I was worth saving." Other people can offer opportunity, but you have to be the one who accepts it. You have to be the one who shows up at 5:30 in the morning. You have to be the one who opens the bank account. You have to be the one who applies to school. Nobody can do that part for you. The student nodded. She was still homeless at that moment, still uncertain. But she was in the program, which meant she was already doing the hardest thing. She was already choosing to believe that different was possible. That night, Maria went home and called David. "I want to formally go into partnership with Elena's Path," she said. "As co-director. I want to make this bigger." "I was hoping you'd say that," David said. "I was hoping you would." And, in the quiet of her apartment, with her cat sleeping on her lap, Maria thought about the mysterious path that life took. She thought about how one person's grief could become another person's opportunity. She thought about how a whispered invitation from a stranger could change everything. She pulled out her phone and texted David, "I'm going back to Marino's tomorrow. I want to tell him what happened. I want him to know that the apples didn't save me, but they led me to something that did." David texted back immediately, "He probably already knows. People know more than we think they do." The next morning, Maria went to Marino's fruit shop. The old vendor looked up from his work. He recognized her immediately, though they had never spoken directly in 3 years. "I want to thank you," Maria said. "For letting me take the fruit. For not calling the police. For quietly allowing me to have dignity in the way you ignored me." Marino set down the apple he was polishing. He was an old man, maybe 80 years old. His hands were weathered and stained like Maria's had once been. "I have a daughter," he said slowly. "She has problems. She doesn't live here, but she lives a hard life. Sometimes I think about how someone might treat her on the worst days of her hardship. So I try to treat everyone like they might be someone's daughter. You were someone's daughter. Still are." Maria cried then, standing in his shop, among the fruit and the smell of decay and renewal. "There's a man," she said. "His name is David. He's starting a non-profit. He's teaching homeless people construction and restoration skills. I wanted to know if you might donate to the project. Even just a little. It's called Elena's Path." Marino smiled. "I know David. He came by last week. I already gave him money. He told me about you. He said you were working in the program now." "He did?" Maria was surprised. "Yes," Marino said. "He said you were the smartest person he knew. That you had survived something that would have broken most people. That you were going to do important work because you understood suffering." Maria left the shop and called David immediately. "You told Marino about me?" "Of course I did," David said. "I tell everyone about you. You're doing incredible work. You're going to change lives." That evening, as the sun set over the city, Maria sat in her apartment and thought about the nature of kindness. She thought about how it spread, how one act of whispered invitation could ripple outward and create new opportunities, new possibilities. She thought about the woman from the shelter who had hit her with her fist in the middle of the night. She thought about the social worker who had been cold when Maria needed warmth. She thought about all the moments when things could have gone differently, when a small kindness might have changed everything earlier. But she also knew that her path had been what it needed to be. She had learned strength in the streets. She had learned humility. She had learned compassion for people in pain. She had learned that the human spirit was more resilient than any circumstance, more powerful than any obstacle. She had learned all of that before she learned that life could be different. And, now, as someone who helped other people learn the same lessons, as someone who stood with others at the threshold of transformation, Maria understood that she had been preparing for this her entire life, through the years of homelessness, through the nights of not knowing where she would sleep, through the sorting of rotten apples that had taught her that even broken things had value. Elena's Path grew. By the end of the second year, they had trained more than 100 people. By the 5th year, more than 500. They expanded to 3 cities. They started a housing program to ensure that graduates didn't return to the streets. They created mentorship opportunities and job placement services. Maria co-directed the organization with David. They worked together with the kind of ease that came from knowing each other, from having shared a mission and a purpose. They never formalized their relationship beyond partnership, but they didn't need to. They were bound by something stronger than romance. They were bound by the girl David had lost and the woman he had found. They were bound by gratitude and purpose and the knowledge that they were using their lives in the way they were meant to be used. 10 years after she stood outside Marino's fruit shop in the cold morning, sorting through waste, Maria graduated with her bachelor's degree in social work. She sat in the auditorium and thought about how far she had come, how many small moments had accumulated to bring her to this place. She thought about how it had all started with a whispered invitation, "Come inside." She had come inside. And, in coming inside, she had found not just shelter and stability, but purpose. She had found that her suffering hadn't been meaningless, it had been education. She had found that the world contained enough kindness to save her, even when she didn't believe in salvation. Most importantly, she had found that she could pass that kindness forward, that she could be the person for others who David had been for her. She could offer the opportunity. She could whisper the invitation. She could believe in the potential of people the world had thrown away. And every time someone came through Elena's path and built a life of dignity and purpose, she knew that Elena was real somewhere, that David's grief had not been wasted, that her own survival had been purposeful. Life, Maria had learned, wasn't about whether you fell. It was about whether you stayed down. And, sometimes, in the moment when you finally believed you would stay down forever, a stranger would whisper an invitation. Someone would offer a chance. And, if you were willing to take it, to hold it carefully, to work with everything you had, the rotten apples that had sustained you would transform into something beautiful. The broken would become beautiful. The invisible would become seen. The abandoned would become valued. And, in valuing others, in offering them the same grace that had been offered to you, you discovered that the real salvation wasn't being rescued, it was becoming the kind of person who could rescue others. And, that, Maria understood, was the greatest transformation of all.